Hello watch enthusiasts. Now, following my previous video about some very good value watches to buy at the moment on the vintage market, I received a great deal of questions about how and where to buy watches, both by email and in the comments. So I would like to talk about the manner in which one should approach purchasing a watch on the vintage market, and this does apply primarily to the internet, though in fact this can be applied to buying from a brick-and-mortar shop. Now, before I start talking about the watches themselves, I think I should talk about the sellers first, because really this can be a very important point to not neglect when considering buying a wristwatch. Now, I would always advise, if you're on, for example, eBay or a similar website, to find a seller with a 100% satisfaction rate in terms of reviews, because often you can find some sellers that are altogether less reliable in terms of the quality of their products. So one does have to be careful to make sure they have that 100% rating. Also, it's worth looking through their reviews to see if they were all done at the same time, and also to look into their other sale items, just to establish whether they are in fact a legitimate seller. Now really, when looking through the various comments they have, it's worth looking at whether all the favourable reviews were given at the same time, or I've even seen this on variations of the same account name. Which can result in the situation whereby they've actually written their own comments on different accounts, which is unlikely, but it can happen, and it is worth making sure. That said, though, it is also worth remembering that websites like eBay are very much in favour of the buyer, not the seller. By that I mean that if you buy an item and it really isn't as it was described, then you are very much entitled to receive your money back, which is an element of safety which I do appreciate on websites like eBay. Rather than certain other websites, and this is why one should really never do deals outside the website if a seller is offering it on eBay. Another aspect to point out about purchasing a watch is the inclusion of a box and papers. Now, in terms of boxes and papers, unless it's a very, very new watch, in which case you can usually be sure that it's the box that the watch came with, in terms of vintage watches, often it's not worth paying a premium for the box and the papers, because more often than not, these papers, or at least the box, is not the original box. It was bought second-hand, used from another source, which means it doesn't really match the watch, and therefore doesn't add value. With regards to papers, more often than not, papers are original, but often they're not complete. They don't actually add any value to the watch. And also, I wouldn't pay anything more for them, because there are a great deal of situations where the papers are either bought used from another purchase, or they are simply forged, which is a real shame. Now, with regards to the choice of the model which is purchased, this can determine the value of the watch that you're going to buy in quite a pronounced way. Now, a very good example of this is the Breitling Transocean to the contemporary Omega Seamaster. So those are those 50s models, which on the face of it look rather similar. The Omega is slightly broader, the Breitling is a slimmer, more elegant watch in my opinion. But the fact that Breitling have made a re-edition of this watch, admittedly a wonderful one, but a re-edition nonetheless, has meant that the price of Transoceans is really 3 times that of an equivalent Seamaster from that era. And this is really baffling in terms of prices, and it pains me to say this because, of course, the Transocean is one of my favourite Breitling models, and I'd love to own one. But Breitling really have made it difficult for people to buy these as a result of the re-edition. And this is the same situation with vintage Omega Speedmasters. The only watch in their lineup which really hasn't been affected by this is, in fact, the Mark II, because it was never a particularly popular model. And this comes on to my point, which is that really one shouldn't aim to buy a watch and aim for a particular model more often than not, because you will often end up spending a heck of a lot more than you aimed to. So generally I feel that it's a better approach to vintage watch buying to simply establish your budget and know pretty much what you're after, but to be very open to other options. Because very often you won't be able to get hold of the watch you're looking for, or at the price you're looking for, it simply won't be available. Similarly, there are a great deal of brands like Cetina, or even Longines, which don't garner quite the same prestige these days as they did back in the day, and so as a result of that, their watches are far less pricey or expensive than a brand which is doing extraordinarily well. Notably, the price of watches like Rolexes on the used market is quite astronomical, really. Even in quite poor nick, when you could get for example, a vintage Seamaster. I come back to the model because it's one which I've looked at quite extensively. You could get one of these watches which have similar specifications from a similar era for much, much less. So it is very much a case of brand name over price. So it really is worthwhile not excluding anything from consideration simply due to its brand, but rather considering all of the aspects of the timepiece itself. By extension, it's often a mistake to buy for investment purposes, simply because one can never really be sure that a watch will do as well in terms of your resale than it did originally, making this a very risky choice to make, and I would always advocate buying a watch because you love it, rather than buying it simply for investment purposes, because often you'll be more disappointed with the purchase, which is a real shame and can put people off the used market. Now, I would like to talk about case materials now, because, of course, one should really always avoid plated cases. As a rule, a plated case is a mistake to go for because the plating wears off very, very quickly, causing a rather unsightly finish whereby one doesn't really have a uniform colour. One has scratches in a sort of a gold hue where there's a base metal underneath, and where the finishing has come off. Also, this means that one can't repolish the watch in any way or refinish it, because this will simply damage the finishing. This is also the case with gold-plated watches, which also tend to lose their plating very easily to reveal the steel underneath, which is really a problem because it means that you get this lack of a uniform finishing of gold over the watch. Gold-filled watches have a thicker layer of gold, and if in particularly good condition, then one can go for a gold-filled watch. But I would still advocate aiming for a solid gold or simply a steel watch, simply to avoid all these difficulties. Now, the manner in which one can gauge whether a watch is indeed plated is either by simply looking at the case. Notably, one will often find a lot of wear on the crown, where the silver-coloured finish has come off to reveal the base metal. Also, around the lugs, where the spring bars have been removed, scratches will be quite apparent, due to the fact that there's quite a soft base metal underneath. Another clear sign that the watch is in fact plated is the fact the case back will say stainless steel back, or fond acier inox in French, as this is often the case, and this is to denote the case back is in fact stainless steel. And the reason for this is because, as with the bronze watches that we've seen recently, the bronze does in fact react very, very vigorously with moisture. A similar thing happens with plated cases, whereby the base metal reacts and bubbles off the finishing, meaning that you actually have to have a stainless steel back if the plating is to remain on and not cause allergies. So the fact that they denote that it's just the back that's stainless steel is very much a clear indicator that the rest of the case is definitely not steel. Now, the second aspect of cases is, of course, the polishing. And by this I mean the over-polishing of cases, or at least the uneven distribution of polishing. Now, often the issue with this is that one loses the crisp edges of the case, and this can hurt the value of a watch. So it's worth comparing an over-polished case to other watches with less polished cases, because I wouldn't necessarily say to not purchase an over-polished case, but certainly one shouldn't pay the same amount as one would for a mint case. So, very telltale signs that a watch has been polished are the fact that the edges are rounded. So notably, if one looks at a Rolex Oyster, there should be a relatively sharp edge between the upper facet of the lugs and the polished case side. So as a result, one can notice that on a lot of polished watches, this bevel is very much smoothed, and the area that would be brushed originally has lost that finish and has become more polished. And this is very much a sign of the fact that it's been over-polished, without taking care to not go over the borders between the two facets. Additionally, what one often finds on a lot of vintage watches is that the lugs aren't the same thickness all around. So notably, one can look at some cases, notice that the top lug is substantially thicker than the bottom lug. That's the case for this Rolex Oyster date. As you can see, the top lug nearest to us, so on the right-hand side of the watch, is substantially thicker than the lower one, suggesting that a lot of polishing has been done to rectify deeper scratches. And this is not a bad thing on the face of things, but again I say one shouldn't pay the same price as a mint condition case for a watch with this sort of refinishing. However, the most important aspect of a watch really is, other than the state of the movement if it's particularly poor, is the dial. Now, the state of the dial, it can be damaged, of course, because it's much more fragile than the case by anything from sunlight to water, to even light moisture or poor workmanship during service. So it really is worthwhile checking this over before making the purchase of a watch. And the dangers with the dial, of course, are the fact that it's not original, and this is more difficult to tell. You really do have to look into the model you're purchasing and really do your research to be sure that you're getting the model which you're after. But also, loom is an easier thing to spot, and this is notably where the loom encroaches on text, for example, on the dial. Notably where a loom pip applied to the dial encroaches on, for example, the Swiss marker at the bottom of the dial, or any other marking on the dial, which is really not the case when the watch leaves the factory, which would suggest a reloom has been undertaken. And though a reloom isn't always a bad thing, it does hurt the resale value of a watch due to the fact that it isn't original. Now, water damage on the dial is often more problematic than a reloom, because this lifts the paint straight off the dial and can cause corrosion to the dial itself, the metal plate on which the dial is painted. And this can be anything from a sort of a general patina. And usually a general patina, like these patinaed Rolex Submariners that one sees quite often, have very good resale values because it's a unified patina across the whole dial, where the dial is discoloured by light. Whereas if it's discoloured by water, this is often very apparent because it's uneven. One sees blotches on the dial where the colour has been removed. And also this is an aspect which can tell you quite a lot about the movement and makes you ask questions, because if this level of water damage has occurred to the dial, then usually this is as a result of sort of large-scale water ingress in terms of droplets actually entering the watch, not simply condensation. And this can play havoc with movements in terms of their lubrication, and also in terms of the metals being oxidised, and therefore changing shape, which causes a great deal of wear and damage. It's also worth establishing the difference between a dust-coated dial and a water-damaged one, because often one can find marks which aren't this sort of a soft cloud-like shape, which often are in fact dust and dirt on the dial after a service, rather than actually being water ingress. So it is very much worthwhile checking this and being absolutely sure about things prior to purchasing a watch. Also, if one can ask a seller to show you the dial, or to if they can take the case back off, show you the inner workings of a watch, this can help you to establish the state of the movement in relation to the dial. Now, if water does enter the case, it will do these sorts of styles of damage to the movement. So, as you can see, this is very much an expensive repair, and because so many different parts of the watch have to be replaced now as a result of this damage. So, this is the sort of thing that one can expect after a watch suffers water damage. This is why, if one's looking for a watch, one really should be able to ask for the case back to be taken off to inspect the movement. And this is the case on the internet, or indeed in terms of buying a watch from a shop. One really should ask to have the case back removed, or at least to see photographs of the movement to get a better idea of the state of the inner workings of the watch. It's also always worthwhile asking about the timekeeping of the watch and whether it holds a charge, in terms of if it stays wound and will work for a while. Because there are a great deal of watches which are stated as working, but in fact don't keep time the way they should, or in fact don't hold a charge. Therefore, it really is crucial to ask all these questions when buying a watch, and not to be shy and not ask the questions, because one can really regret not asking a question when one has purchased a watch which isn't what one expected. That said, though, it's always a good idea to clarify all these points before buying the watch, because with websites like eBay, for example, the buyer has a great deal of protection if in fact the seller is not legitimate with regards to the state of the watch. They can very much inquire with eBay as to a refund, and eBay are usually very, very helpful with these sorts of problems, because I know that from selling things on eBay, often one doesn't get paid for a few weeks after the eBay transaction has cleared, due to the fact that eBay have to have to be sure that the item is as described and has been received well. Anyway, I shall end this video here of my various tips and suggestions and pieces of advice when buying a vintage watch from really any source, be it eBay, be it a brick and mortar shop. So thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, then please do like, share and subscribe to help the channel and to enjoy more content. So thank you very much for watching. This is Sam on the Watch Guy, over and out.